Ayan na. Kamusta naman kayo dyan, mga kameta? Welcome back to reality na tayo. Ito na, nagsimula na officially ang taon natin when it comes to going back to work, going back to the normal routine. So yan, balik na naman sa traffic, balik na naman sa realidad, and of course, balik na naman sa politika, guys. So dapat pag-usapan natin ang what is the lay of the land in the coming days and coming years, well, not years, months rather. At kasama dyan, of course, itong issue ng budget ni BBM, mga patuloy na mga kritisismo, patuloy na mga kontrobersiya, patuloy na mga banat, no? Laban sa budget, laban sa mga pinagagawa ng administration ngayon pagdating sa parating na budget for this year, especially as we head into the election year. Kanina lang, of course, we had no less than yung ating minamahal na mayor na ito. Kanina we had no less than yung minamahal natin na mayor sa Baguio. Mayor Magalong was on Storycon with sila Ronald Llamas, at of course balikan naman si Mayor Magalong dun sa kanyang banat pagdating sa issue ng pork barrel funds, sa issue ng corruption, sa issue ng kickbacks. I mean, after all, this was the person who ran successfully, although it was not easy, for the election noong 2020 based on good governance. Essentially, just good governance, walang politika, serbisyo lang. No? So yung ganyan yung line niya. And of course, isa siya sa mga main conveners at saka main leaders ng tinatawag na Mayors for Good Governance. So kanina ang banat ni Mayor Magalong was that talagang maraming mga questionable dito sa budget ng administration, maraming questionable dito sa mga fiscal practices ng administration. Siguro naka 15 different episodes at vlogs na po tayo ukol dito sa mga ukol sa mga PhilHealth issue pa lang, di ba? So ang dami natin na tinitingnan dyan sa issue na yan. Now, I just want to bring this out, guys. Ito.
You released an open letter about the budget several days ago, I think. But I'm not exactly sure about the date. I just know about the contents. Pero sir, when the president signed the budget for 2025 on December 30, he supposedly cured some of the complaints against the BICAM version. I'm wondering lang if you feel that the concerns were addressed, kasi I don't know if your open letter came after the signing or before the signing. So what do you think of the signed GAA for 2025, specifically yung AKAP, specifically yung increases doon sa DPWH at yung unprogrammed funds?
Well, alam mo, Ed, all the while, akala ko pag-uusapan natin yung tourism sa bahay.
We'll also get there, sir. Hindi ko lang na. Sorry, sir.
Nahuli yata ako rin. Anyway, first, I just would like to clarify na yung anim alyansang nagkakaisang mamamayan is a group of advocates for good governance at yung fight against corruption. And it's composed of retired generals, may mga clergies din siya, people from the private sector, from the health sector, youth sector, women's sector, iba-iba. At I'm not a member of ANIM. Isa lang ako doon sa mga pumirma no kanilang manifesto. So, pagdating naman doon sa critical issues ng budget, talagang nakuhan kami, may ginawa rin ang ating presidente na nakuhan din niya, nabito niya yung worth 194 billion. Pero siyempre may kakulangan pa. Siguro may reasons kung bakit yan hindi niya masyadong natutukan pa yung AKAP. Pero yung AKAP kasi talagang nagulat kami doon sa amount ng 26 billion. Doon sa pondo ng DPWH na increase pa uli ng 288 billion na hindi naman hinihingi ni Secretary Bunuan. Tapos yung unprogram amount, yun ang nakakatakot yun ang program. Although, pasan, pero pa rin, malaki pa rin yung sabihin natin ang nabawas doon sa program amount is about 168 billion. Pero malaki pa rin ang unprogram. Ibig sabihin, anytime pwede silang mag-disburse ng fund, gamitin nila sa iba't ibang mga proyekto nila. At nakakatakot yun. Nakakatakot yung ganun kalaki. So, yun ang mga kina-question namin na pinirmahan ko doon sa manifesto na yun.
Sir, in particular yung AKAP, kasi yung AKAP, again, as you also pointed out, the AKAP was not even in the National Expenditure Program for this for 2025. I mean, it was not even submitted by Malacanang. Yet it was put in put in by the BICAM, and it was approved pa rin by the President. Tapos, well, I'm sure you've heard about it. Ang sabi ni Senator Grace po, ang hatian nila is 21 for Congress, 5 billion for the senators. May I ask you, you think, are you also of the opinion that that's kind of pork barrel?
Yeah, basically it's also a pork barrel. Kasi nga, balikan natin 2024, biglang nagkaroon ng APCAP ang 2024. At kung iisipin mo, ngayon pa lang pala magkakaroon ng guidelines. Paano yung ACAP na binigay last year? Na ang dami namigay last year. Wala pa lang guidelines pala yun. No? So yun na nakakatakot doon. So gamit ng ating mga lawmakers at yun ang mga ginamit nila para ipamigay nila na wala pa lang guidelines. No? At ngayon pa lang gagawa ng guidelines. Pero kung titingnan mo yung what is happening on the ground, marami sa mga lawmakers natin ginagamit yan parang ayuda nila. Para akala mo personal money nila. At ipinagmamalaki pa nila yan na kami lang ang namimigay nito. Tapos gusto pa nila na sila ang namimigay. Para talagang magpapasalamat yung tao sa kanila. Never like sila, no? Bihirang-bihira sa mga lawmakers na nagsasabi na itong AKAP na to o itong AX na to, ito yung mga natatanggap nyo na to, taxpayers' money. Pera ng bayan ito. Ito yung mga taxes na binabayaran nating lahat. Pag tinatanong ko nga yung mga beneficiaries, at sabi ko, who's filing your income tax? Kukunti lang. Ibig sabihin niya, wala kayong binabayad na tax. Lahat tayo nagbabayad ng tax. Every item that we buy at the stores, the department stores, every food item, tax yan. Kaya,
So, basically, nakita niyo yung thrust ng intervention ni Mayor Magalong, and of course, he speaks along the lines na narinig natin sa marami natin mga kaibigan, especially yung mga sa good governance movement, yung mga iba't ibang mga civil society groups, mga iba't ibang eksperto, ekonomista, of course former Justice Antonio Carpio, mga other things. Lahat pa sila concerned sila dito, no? Sa budget ng administration, sa lack of or alleged lack of guidelines or safeguards to make sure na hindi magkakaroon ng mambo jumbo. And of course, wag din natin kalimutan na mukhang may mga last minute changes na nangyari, may mga last minutes na dinagdag, may mga last minutes na idadagdag pa. So there's a lot of question marks. There are a lot of question marks, and unfortunately, hindi tayo, this is not the first time we've been here. We have been here for quite a long time, di ba? Etong issue ng pork barrel funds have been raised from one election cycle to another election cycle, from one administration to another administration, and completely I support etong adhikay ng mga mayors for good governance, anim group, different civil society groups, yung kasama natin God willing next week naman dun sa isang talk natin si Prof. Cello, Justice Scorpio. I think everyone is doing really a fantastic job here of making sure talaga na sinuscrutinize natin ng mabuti itong budget ng gobyerno, itong budget para sa Kongreso in particular, especially ahead of the election. So wala akong problema dyan. My problem, nevertheless, is this. At babalikan natin ulit, guys, no, yung sinasabi ko na dapat wag natin kalimutan na ang Vice Presidente mga Sara Duterte. So anything that undermines Bongbong Marcos inevitably benefits Sara Duterte. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't criticize BBM. But that just means you have to keep the full picture in mind, right? And speaking of the full picture, ito yung sinasabi ko for quite some time at gusto ko ipakita ko sa inyo guys. Ito na po yung narrative ng essentially Team DDS. And they're really juicing it. Because if you look at it, halos lahat ng conversation natin nowadays ay ukol sa budget. Right? Halos lahat. Either yun or yung mga sayaw-sayaw na lang ng piatos. And in fact, the whole piatos and confidential fund issue naging patawa na lang siya. And I can see that. I can see that from reactions and responses dito sa sa mga posts natin and all. And I think what's happening is a bit worrying because parang natatabunan na yung mga nabubuking na bagay. At mukhang nagmo-move on na yung news cycle in ways na hindi nakakatulong, right? And at the same time, and I think this is the most important part, wina-weaponize na talaga ng mga DDS itong discussion ngayon. So essentially, ito po yung line, ito po yung narrative ng Team DDS ngayon. Si Sara Duterte, ginagawa ng malaking issue, kinakawawa, wini-witch hunt, um, pero kung titignan mo, kawawa naman siya. All of this is only because of yung 125 million pesos na confidential fund niya na deserve naman niya. Na kailangan niya because DepEd Secretary siya, dapat kailangan niya yan dahil tutulungan niya yung mga estudyante para hindi ma-recruit ng NPA dahil ang trabaho supposedly ng DepEd ay labanan ng NPA at magkakaroon ng safe houses at magkakaroon ng witness at magkakaroon ng reward systems at magkakaroon ng kung ano-anong bagay para lumaban sa mga separatist groups or national security threats. So parang basically the idea there is that kawawa lang si Sara, binibiktima lang siya, napakaliit lang yung amount ng pinag-usapan, and then the real deal is actually BBM. No, pag titignan mo, ang tunay na corruption, ang tunay na anomalya ay dun na sa administration na yan. And then ilalagay nila lahat ng budget of the president. Now, this is the line. This is absolutely the line of the DDS right now. And you can see how exactly they're taking advantage dito sa shift in the news cycles and the shift in focus. Again, just to be absolutely clear, I completely agree with Mayor Magalong. I completely agree with Justice Carpio, yung mga kaibigan natin, na talagang dapat tututukan natin ng mabuti, guys, itong budget na ito. At of course, ayaw natin ng pork barrel, ayaw natin ng mga yung inaabuso ng ayuda ng mga politiko. And of course, we have to raise awareness about that. But we should not forget again, that whatever we do is also being weaponized by the DDS camp to essentially divert attention. This is the ultimate distraction strategy na ginagamit nila. So para sinasabi ng tao, nagdi-distraction ng mga Dutertes pag nagwawala si Sara, medyo nagme-meltdown na, nagmumura na, or nagpapatawa, or nagsasayaw. Actually, for me, mas effective yung ganitong approach. And to a certain degree, naging very effective actually yung approach na ito. Because halos hindi na pinag-usapan yung confidential funds ni Sara. And let's not forget, and this is the third level, right? So first level, guys, agree tayo, dapat tututukan natin ng mabuti yung budget ng administration. Pangalawa, wag natin kalimutan na the number one beneficiary of weakening of BBM is always automatically the Vice President and the Dutertes. And the third, and this is where I'm gonna build on this, is that the Dutertes, actually, ginagamit nila yung mga issues sa mga nangyayari ngayon para matatabunan yung mga hindi lang anomalya ngayon. Because anong problema sa ganitong so on the surface it seems very factual, right? But actually it's very misleading. Why? Unang-una, wag natin kalimutan na ang presidente ay commander-in-chief. Alright? At bilang commander-in-chief, right, iba yung mga responsibilidad niya. Alright? Na may kinalaman sa national security. At the same time, I'm not very sure that applies to the vice president, and at the same time, I'm not very sure that applies to the DepEd secretary or ex-DepEd secretary. Now, having said that, personally, against ako sa confidential funds kasi alam natin na naabuso talaga itong confidential funds na yan. Now, siguro a minimal amount of confidential fund, yung katulad ng meron tayo ng panahon ni Pinoy, maybe makes sense because at the end of the day, Malacanang has to have some basic sense of its own security, intelligence gathering, counterintelligence, among others. Especially ngayon, guys, na medyo grabe yung hidwaan sa West Philippine Sea at grabe itong banggaan ng US and China. And of course, may credible threats could be down the road, and you have no less than the vice president openly threatening the president's life, right? Or the first lady's life. But even if I'm against confidential funds, my point is misleading itong narrative na to because it makes it look like parang tingnan mo naman kawawa naman si Sara Duterte, lahat ng naman talagang yung mga mali nangyari kay BBM, bakit siya hindi kino-question? So for me, our stance should be clear. We should be against any kind of confidential fund, and we should be also against any kind of strategy that tries to distract us dun sa mga nabubuking na corruption or nabubuking na irregularity. Because the other thing that is misleading dito sa narrative na ito is that the issue with Sara Duterte was not only the confidential fund. The issue with Sara Duterte were many, many, many things, right? Including yung mga ibang practices nila sa loob ng DepEd, Department of Education, yung inefficiencies niya at kapalpakan niya as a DepEd Secretary, yung underinvestments niya, underutilization ng funds niya, yung lack of investment niya sa classrooms, etc. So maraming issue yan. But let's not forget, it's not only about Sara Duterte, it's about the Duterte family in general. Because if you look at the Duterte family in general, so kanina nakita ko may nag-comment, parehas naman magnanakaw eh. Wala akong sinasabi. But, remember, ang issue sa mga Duterte ay hindi lang fiscal anomalies. Right? Ang issue sa mga Duterte is way, way more than that. And speaking of fiscal anomalies, the other thing that this doesn't also show, guys, is this. Kamusta po ang Farmali? Kamusta po ang Pogo? Because if the issue here is that million lang pinag-usapan dito, at dito billions ang pinag-usapan, right? Right? Eh di pag-usapan natin. Kamusta po yung investigation sa Farmali? Naalala niyo yung Farmali? Nung panahon ni Digong? 'Di ba? Nung pandemic time. Naalala niyo yung mga kababalaghan? Naalala niyo yung mga kontrobersiya? Naalala niyo yung mga concern ng tao dun sa mga sa expenditures ng DOH dun sa allegedly overspending or alleged yung mga issues sa mga vaccines, yung napakamahal na vaccines ng China, yung issue sa PPE, yung mga basic ang daming issue sa DOH nung panahon ni Digong. Ang daming issue dun sa Farmali. And sino yung involved sa Farmali? Anong relationship niya sa mga Dutertes? So, if you want to talk about billions, guys, let's talk about Farmali. Let's talk about Pogos. My goodness, pagdating sa Pogo, billions ang pinag-usapan natin na dirty money. Billions of dollars, potentially. Dollars, hindi lang pesos. Dollars ang pwede natin pag-usapan, potentially. Ukol sa, billions of dollars ang pinag-usapan natin potentially pagdating sa dirty money, money laundering, among other things. At sa tingin nyo, sino nagbe-benefit dyan? Sino nagpapapasok sa mga pogos sa Pilipinas? Right? Sino sa tingin nyo nag-benefit? Sinong protector ng mga pogos? Right? Ano bang mga pinakita ng mga investigations? So, ito yung sinisabi ko na misleading eh. Ito yung at dito ko sinisabi, guys, na dapat consistent yung opposition. And this applies to our good Mayor Magalong. Mayor Magalong, if you want to mention anomalies with the budget of the BBM administration, why not also mention Farmali funds? Why not also mention confidential funds ni Digong? Year after year after year, billions and billions and billions yung confidential fund ni Digong. Right? And hindi lang si Digong. Kamusta yung confidential fund ni Sara Duterte sa Davao when she was a mayor of Davao? Kamusta yung confidential fund practices nila? Kumbaga, sabi nga ni Justice Carpio na taga Davao, the whole confidential fund, essentially as a concept, as a practice, started with the Dutertes. Right? So, una-una, dapat ingat talaga yung genuine opposition na hindi nila hayaan na unang-una, matabunan yung mga nung mga binuga at saka mga na-expose. Pangalawa, dapat balikan din natin yung Farmali issue. Balikan din natin yung Pogo issues. Balikan din natin yung mga bilyones ng confidential funds and bilyones na potentially questionable practices ng dating administration. Not to mention billions of dollars of money laundry, dirty money, kung ano-ano na ginawa ng mga Pogos at alam natin sila nagpapasok sa mga Pogos. And I don't want to even go to level of Senator Trillanes talking about, like Godfather ito ng mga drug lords. We don't even need to go that level. Let's just look at confidential funds of Dutertes, the father, the daughter, the brothers. Let's look at confidential fund in Davao. Let's look at Farmali. Let's look at questionable practices ng pandemic sa DOH, confidential funds in Digong bilang presidente, on and on and on. Those are billions. And we're talking potentially billions of dollars here. So sana balikan din yan ng opposition. So whether this is Mayor Magalong, I'm not saying he's opposition, but if Mayor Magalong wants to raise issues, I want to hear more from him about Farmali. I want to hear more from DOH. some of our friends in civil society, in the academe, na gustong-gusto nila pag-usapan yung mga, pag-usapan nyo din yan. No, this is not about whataboutism. This is absolutely about consistency. Because if what we're gonna do is just focus lang tayo dun sa latest anomaly or latest issue lang, tapos matatabunan yung lahat, and then what? Kasi, ang pwede mangyari lang dito is kung kung matatabunan yung issue kay Sara at mga Dutertes, the Dutertes will recover and they'll be fine. And at the same time, I doubt that that will also bring down BBM. At the end of the day, we're just gonna move from one news cycle to another cycle. We're gonna move from one anti-government or corruption movement to another anti-corruption, at wala itong culmination. But katulad ng sinabi natin, what makes also the Dutertes quite special between the two of these two notorious dynasties, and let's call them for what it is that meron din yung aspeto kasi ng EJK. Meron din kasi aspeto ng questionable deals, gentleman's agreement with China, right? So there's so many layers dito sa mga ginagawa at mga kababalagan ng mga Dutertes na ngayon ay natatabunan. At yun ang concern ko, guys. Yun ang concern ko. Kaya because I can see on news cycles I can see yung headlines. I can see saan nagre-respond ng tao. I can see saan nagfo-focus yung ating mga kaibigan. I can see saan naka-concentrate yung yung kritisismo ng mga tao, 'di ba? And yun nga my fear is ang mangyari dito sa Pilipinas is scattershot. Jumping from one side to the other side, when in fact what the genuine opposition should do, what the civil society should do, is to have a calibrated approach whereby boom, 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 focus talaga, scrutiny dito sa budget and administration, but at the same time, don't forget the Duterte issue. Don't forget the billions from the Duterte presidency era in terms of potential anomalies. Don't forget yung EJK, lives of people, tens of thousands of lives potentially lost, right? Look at yung secret agreement with China. My goodness, yung ating territorial integrity. These are serious, guys, issues. These are serious issues that we have to look at, no? So, alam ko mahirap yan. It's really, really difficult. It's really, really difficult because you cannot do everything at the same time. But you have to sequence, you have to compartmentalize, you have to nuance. So, every time na mag-mention ka ng mga questionable practice dito, mag-harken back ka sa dating administration. Pwede mo sabihin, hindi kami natutuwa sa ginagawa ni BBM. Akala namin si BBM mas mabuti. Bakit ginagawa mo yung ginawa ni Digong, di ba? Yung ganon So, do not make it too easy for the Duterte side. Especially sa ating bansa kung saan napakadali, guys. Napakadali for people to just move from one news cycle to another news cycle, move from one movement to another movement, move from one enthusiasm to the other. Kaya wala tayong napapala Kasi hindi institutionalized, kasi hindi focused, kasi hindi compartmentalized. At hindi nuanced. But there are levels. You don't need to read, Dante's, seven levels of hell or something to realize there are levels to things, right? Na as much as you have problem with one side, do not forget that next level yung other side, right? As much as you want every bad person to be held accountable, you have to also look at the momentum, lay of the land, political dynamics, feasibility, and all of those things. And as I said, after month after month after month of Quadcom, after month month na expose lahat ng mga kababalagan ng mga Dutertes and ganun, and then ngayon, boom, parang wala na yan, move on na tayo sa next issue, right? And this is where things can get very interesting, guys. This is where things can get very interesting because ang mangyari lang dyan dito is ping-pong lang yan. Ping-pong lang yan. And hindi magkakaroon ng, essentially, hindi magkakaroon ng a new synthesis, right? Hindi magkakaroon ng resolution. At that's why sa aking palagay, guys, dapat makipag-usap talaga yung mga iba't ibang mga civil society groups and all at titignan nila yung issue na yan. Okay, what are we trying to do here? First of all, dapat identify nyo yung mga ibang tao na critical sa BBM administration, ginagawa ba nila yan dahil critical talaga sila sa BBM administration or may iba silang ulterior motive? You also have to look at that because maraming sumasakay dito. In fact, more worrying yung mga ibang sumasakay dito ay may military background, ay nagpo-push for revolutionary government. And as I said, RevGov could be, um, the whole idea of RevGov could be the one big beneficiary of all of this mess, right? Because at some point, kung maging cynical lang tao and people look at it and say, oh, ganyan naman to, walang hopeless case. Ganyan naman to, hopeless case. Wala naman nangyari, let's go for something crazy. That's where things could get very dangerous. I mean, just look at South Korea, guys. Napaka-developed ng country, advanced sa atin. Hanggang ngayon, may political crisis sila. Yung president nila, out of nowhere, mag-martial law. Next thing you know, na-impeach siya. Next thing you know, ayaw na magpa-arrest. Next thing you know, nag-google na, ang gulo na yung bansa nila. And this is South Korea we're talking about, right? So if it could happen in South Korea, why it couldn't happen here? The other day, usapan natin, coup d'etats. Nakailang coup d'etats na tayo? Dozens of coup d'etats throughout the past half a century. So, again, this is where I know it's very, very tricky. It's very, very difficult. But we have to keep things in mind. And we shouldn't forget recent past. Farmali is a recent past issue. DOH scandals are recent past issues, guys. Isa sa pinakamalaking dahilan na walang budget, kulang yung pera ng gobyerno natin actually. Because 'di ba, yung kritisismo sa national budget this year is napakalaki kumpara sa revenues natin. So obviously, one way of plugging it in is raise taxes and the other way is raise borrowing. But again, people should not forget na we inherited huge debt. Sobrang laki ng utang natin from Digong's time. Why is that not being discussed? You know, why is not that not being discussed? So hindi lang corruption eh. Also, irresponsible and reckless practices. Big debt. So whether ito is from Marcos Sr. or from Digong, we have to talk about those things. So guys, ito yung problema ko talaga guys. Ito talaga yung problema ko kasi wala tayong continuous longitudinal analysis at wala tayong ideas of path dependency, right? That many of the problems we're facing today is a result of the past mistakes or past anomalies and past corruption. And then all we want to do is just to talk about the latest thing na mali, right? Now, so go ahead, criticize, scrutinize, pressure, isiguraduhin natin itong AKAP fund, whatever fund, hindi mapunta sa anong kababalagan. Siguraduhin natin yung PhilHealth natin ay sustainable. Kakasabi lang ni Finance Secretary Recto na gusto nila dadagdagan yung coverage ng PhilHealth na to. But how are they gonna do that? Of course, we have to pressure them on that. But then again, don't forget the Duterte aspect. Don't forget the legacy of the Duterte legacy. Don't forget Farmali. Don't forget all EJKs. Don't forget all of those other issues. Very, very, very important ito, guys. Very, very important ito, guys. No? Now, sa mga susunod na araw, balikan natin itong issue na to, itong mga issue na to because there's so much to discuss. And then hopefully with Ronald Llamas, hopefully with Justice Carpi again, hopefully with a couple of other people. Maybe I'll need to talk also to Mayor Magalang about this among other people. We have to do this, guys. We have to be responsible. We have to be calibrated. We should not fall for false equivalence. Even if you're talking about, kaya may tinatawag na lesser evil because they're levels, right? Those are the things that you have to keep in mind. It's very, very important, guys. And I think mahalaga dito na hindi magkanya-kanyang diskarte, magme-mercenary, magkakanya-kanyang yun din ang napansin kong problema sa opposition minsan. I'll be honest about it. Everyone wants to be the David to the Goliath. Everyone gusto nila maging gusto nila sila na lang. Sila na lang ang hero, siya na. When in fact, actually, we should all work together to make sure that collectively we can put pressure. We can push things in the right direction. And we can eventually create a counter movement. In fact, the best thing that has to happen here, guys, is that all the wrongs of this administration and all of the exposed wrongs of the past administration and the vice president, all of this, if you approach them correctly, it will actually provide, guys, the right momentum for the good guys, the good people, right? But if it's just scattershot, tira-tira sa Dutertes, wala mangyayari dyan. You're just gonna be an unwitting proxy of the two sides. And that's what should not happen, guys, here. That's what should not happen, guys, here. And at the same time, have a sense of perspective. For me, potentially treasonous activities, mass atrocities and EJKs, I think they're even worse than corruption. And it just happens that actually there's also confidential fund, there's also Farmali, there's also Pogo and all of those things. Because, so now let me sige, i-ground natin yung sinasabi ko dito. Pag titignan nyo yung sinasabi ko dito, essentially ang sinasabi ko is, unfortunately, dahil wala tayong rule of law, mahirap umasa sa mga institution lang natin. Because sa isang mature democracy, but even in the US, my goodness, look at how things are going on. But nevertheless, in a more mature democracy, pwede ka umasa sa mga institution, right? Pwede ka umasa sa mga korte. Pwede ka umasa sa mga civil society because may rule of law. And what is rule of law? It's the uniform and predictable application of the letter and the spirit of the Constitution to everyone, regardless of their position, power, or prestige, or partisan leaning, right? Unfortunately, because wala tayong rule of law, and at the same time, we live in an era of social media, simulacra, almost postmodern democracy, public attention is the ultimate currency of power. Any issue that gets more public attention, that issue has more political momentum behind it. And in a situation whereby wala tayong rule of law and everything is driven by attention and news cycles, you know what's the worst case scenario is scattershot, jump from one to the other, or worse, even worse than that, tulungan mo pa yung mas masama pa side, di ba? I'm just being realistic about this, guys, because to be honest, I'm not hearing many people spelling this out. I think everyone is just picking their own fight and just focusing on that fight without looking at the big picture. And the thing I've been doing for the past weeks and months is always looking at the big picture. Saan papunta itong bansa natin? Because we always start with one enthusiasm and it peters out after a few months. Then we jump into another enthusiasm. It's just a cycle. It's just like Machiavelli's history of a pre-modern society. It's a cycle. There's no linear development. There's no forward movement of history. There's no Hegelian direction to that history, right? Or at least just modernization and improvement, for heaven's sake, right? So yun, guys, that's the thing that I want you guys to keep in mind, because as we talk, I'm monitoring also how these things are being weaponized. In fact, things are being weaponized even on a different level. My goodness, kanina may nakita tayo na itong mga ka-DDS natin ginagamit pa ang legacy. Ginagamit pa ang legacy ng people power, ang anti-martial law protest. Ginagamit yung legacy ng liberalismo at progressive movement sa Pilipinas to say na sila ngayon ang bayani natin, di ba? So kanina sabi ko ang problema natin is maraming pabida-bida na gusto nila sila lang, yung iba parang nasan kayo nung panundigo, ngayon biglang kayo ng bida, di ba? Yung mga ganun, di ba? But whatever, right? We're not here to keep scores. Ang point ko lang dito is sana hindi pabida-bida lahat. Sana idikit-dikit natin yung mga pangyayari throughout different administration. Sana tignan natin yung path dependency. Sana titignan natin paano tayo magkaroon ng balanced and compartmentalized and calibrated approach. But also, dapat titignan natin paano tayo hindi maging unwitting enablers ng forces of darkness. Kasi grabe, nakita ko na parang, wow, yung pagtanggal daw ni Sara Duterte sa National Security Council ay isang abuso, isang political persecution. Hello. Pati si Lenny rin naman, hindi sinama ni Digong sa Hindi must na isama yung Vice President sa National Security Council, especially kung talagang may hidwaan at walang level of trust and confidence. So ito, once again, you're allowing the Dutertes to get away with it if you don't point out their own practices during their day, whether it's Farmali, whether it's Pogo, whether it's not allowing Lenny to attend or kicking out Lenny of important cabinet meetings and eventually forcing her out of the cabinet meetings, right? And then ngayon pabiktima sila. Speaking of people power, ano yung stance ni Duterte sa people power? Ano yung mga sinabi ni Digong ukol kay Ninoy, Pinoy, Liberal Party, Aquinos, EDSA? Did they do anything positive in favor of that? Hindi ba sila yung nagbabastos sa mga kay Ninoy at saka sa mga Liberal Party at sa mga Aquinos? Tapos ngayon biglang pag-usapan nila yung kanilang role bilang biglang people power mode na. So again, you see, this is weaponization, this is exploitation, and this has to be called out, and this has to be kept in mind, guys. Now, having said all of those things, yes, eyes wide open. Eyes wide open. Kaya sabi ko, sa isang banda, tuwan-tuwa ang mga tao kasi ayan, popcorn na tayo, nag-aaway yung dalawang side. But ngayon, nakikita niyo rin, mahirap actually yung situation din ngayon dahil hindi mo alam, wait lang, saan tayo mag-focus? Kasi ang dami mga There's like an overwhelming amount of controversies and things to look at, diba? Um, oh yeah, speaking of people power, and then you have certain religious groups or reactionary groups also trying to ride that people power motto, and try to push for a certain political agenda, diba? So yes, at the same time, agree din naman ako eh. Now, we have to also be vigilant in watching yung mga ginagawa ng kasalukuyan administration when it comes to historical revisionism. Wala namang problema na, na nilagyan ng mga animal natin, di ba? In a good sense, right? But at the same time, parang tinatanggal yung mga ibang leaders natin, including, di ba? And at the same time, parang dina-downplay na yung legacy ni Ninoy at saka yung EDSA celebration. You have to be careful about that. Yung Maharlika Fund, balikan din natin yung Maharlika Fund. Tignan natin na mabuti yung Maharlika Fund. IMF, International Monetary Fund, also said something about Maharlika Fund, and that we have to make sure na, uh, Maharlika Fund returns the money to where it belongs. And since mukhang walang saysay itong Maharlika Fund, perhaps it just should be closed down as a horrible, bad idea. And it's a good thing that didn't it really gain traction or whatever. But do you get what I'm saying? What I'm saying, guys, here? Mahirap itong situation natin ngayon dahil it's so easy to be distracted, and it's so easy to lose sight of the big picture, and it's so easy to be manipulated, exploited, and to be unwitting enablers of one side, and in this case I would say the worst side. Right? But that's why you have to talk, that's why you have to constantly think, and that's why you have to call out these things. That's why we have to be very, very, very vigilant. And if we do everything right, guys, if we do everything right, malay nyo, if a new space might open up for really the good guys. On that note, thank you very much mga kameta. Maraming salamat again. I hope you guys are adjusting back to reality as the year kicks, the starts, roars into action. Medyo slow pa rin napansin ko medyo slow pa rin ng hindi naman slow yung news cycles, but medyo hindi ganun kasi the same level yung engagements and all of that. So maybe I think people are just transitioning back. But while medyo we're getting over our ring rust and trying to consolidate our ideas and figure out what the year could look like, I just wanted to remind everyone, don't lose sight of the big picture and don't lose sight of the immediate past, including the legacy of Duterte. And of course, how Sara Duterte is the biggest beneficiary of any sole or predominant focus only on the wrongs, real or perceived, of the current administration. We have to keep this in mind, and I'll tell this again. Yes, if there's one thing that is worse than corruption, it's extrajudicial killings. It's treason. It's and fill in the blanks. All right. Thank you very much. God bless, and talk to you soon. Maraming salamat. And please don't forget to follow us also on Spotify natin. Medyo nagsisimula tayo na mag-upload. Kakalabas rin sa Cool Pals yung first part ng discussion natin with Xiao Chua and the fantastic Cool Pals guys. There'll be a second part coming out soon. So far, very good responses. Very supportive responses. Thank you also sa mga ka-Cool Pals natin. And God willing, may that be the beginning of more collaboration with friends and folks, not only in the civil society, academic circles and all, but also working with people in the comedy scene, in the cultural scene. Because sa aking palagay, at the end of the day, perhaps, I don't know kung nag-guess ng tao, yung mga patawa natin na sayaw-sayaw, that's also my way of acknowledging that at the end of the day, we have to, we have to see how paano makakatulong ang kultura para sa atin, para makarelate sa ating mga kababayan. Because kung political lang ang pag-usapan natin all the time, it's overwhelming. I understand. It can get very overwhelming. So, kaya mahalaga rin na, once in a while, medyo kalog-kalog rin tayo. But at the same time, culture is the greatest, straightest path to the people's hearts and minds when it comes to politics. And kaya nga, appreciate natin itong mga collaborations natin with good friends natin, especially the Cool Pals. So thank you so much also sa mga ka-Cool Pals natin. And thank you so much sa lahat ng mga bagong followers natin on Spotify. Again, if you want to see a version of itong mga sinasabi natin, pinag-usapan natin, without any advertisement, without any interruption, etc., tingnan mo lang yung Spotify. Right? Doon, you're gonna get everything without any interruption, and as straight to the point as possible. And of course, stay tuned because we're gonna have more interesting discussion lined up for the coming week or so. I'll be in and out, obviously with with my own international engagements and all. But obviously, next month, yun na yung simula ng elections. So I'll have to also start to arrange yung mga in-person interviews and discussions katulad ng ginawa natin sa mga year-enders natin. So God willing, hopefully that's just the beginning of a new chapter of approaching this different kung saan medyo ano na in person na no in person na yung mga interviews natin hindi lang over Zoom, but while we're on the move tuloy-tuloy yung mga Zoom based interviews natin, which I still hope you guys appreciate. At the moment also na-upload na rin po natin on our YouTube yung interview natin with Admiral Romel Jude Ong, and doon pinag-usapan natin yung threat talaga posed by the Dutertes when it comes to destabilization, potential coup d'etat, revolutionary government, dirty tricks, China element, and what have you, right? Those are the things that you have to look at, all right? Thank you very much. God bless, and